The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty depot, and Deanna Emerson pressed her gloved hand against the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her corset as she stared at the sun-bleached buildings of Lovelock, Nevada, wondering if the man waiting for her would see straight through to all her inadequacies the moment their eyes met. It was September of 1882, and the heat still clung to the high desert like a second skin, even as autumn approached. Deanna had spent 3 weeks traveling from Boston, her trunk filled with everything she owned in the world, which amounted to precious little after her father's debts had consumed their family home and left her with nothing but her education, and a stack of unopened letters from a rancher named Benjamin Kincaid, who needed a wife. She stepped down from the stagecoach with trembling legs, her dark blue traveling dress already coated with a fine layer of dust, despite her best efforts to stay presentable. The driver hauled her trunk down with a grunt and tipped his hat before climbing back up to continue his route. Deanna stood alone on the wooden sidewalk, clutching her reticule and scanning the handful of people moving along the street. Lovelock was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of simple buildings clustered along the main thoroughfare with the vast desert stretching endlessly in every direction. The Humboldt River cut through the landscape somewhere to the north, providing the lifeblood that made settlement possible in this harsh terrain. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing against the bright September sky. "Miss Emerson," the voice came from behind her, deep and uncertain. Deanna turned and found herself looking up into the weathered face of a man who appeared to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in lamplight. His brown hair needed cutting, curling slightly at his collar, and his clothes were clean but worn, the mark of a working man who took care with what he had. "Mr. Kincaid." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He removed his hat, revealing more of those earnest eyes that seemed to be searching her face for something. "Benjamin, please, I'm right glad you made it safe. The journey must have been hard." "It was long," Deanna admitted. She wanted to say something charming, something to make a good first impression, but her mind had gone blank. This man was to be her husband, and he was a complete stranger who knew nothing of her failures, her fears, her absolute certainty that she was not cut out for life on a Nevada ranch. Benjamin picked up her trunk with ease despite its weight. "I've got a wagon just down the way. The ranch is about 8 miles out. I know you must be tired and hungry. We can talk on the way, or if you prefer some quiet after all that traveling, I understand." His consideration caught her off guard. Deanna had expected many things from this arrangement, but kindness had not been at the forefront of her imaginings. "Thank you. I think I would like to talk if that suits you. We should become acquainted." A small smile touched his lips, transforming his serious face into something warmer. "I'd like that too." He led her to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses, both of them well-groomed and calm. Benjamin loaded her trunk into the back and then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. His palm was calloused and warm through her glove, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. As they rolled out of town, Benjamin kept the horses to an easy pace. "I want to be honest with you from the start, Miss Emerson. The ranch isn't anything fancy. It's a working cattle operation, about 500 acres with grazing rights on another 1,000. I've got a small house, nothing like what you're probably used to back east. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a main room. There's a well with good water and a root cellar. I keep chickens and a milk cow along with the cattle herd." Deanna listened, trying to picture it all. "How long have you had the ranch?" "Going on 6 years now. My father left me some money when he passed, and I came out here to make something of myself. It's been good land to me, but it's lonely work." He glanced at her, then back at the road. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Miss Emerson. I needed a wife, and I hope I can be a good husband to you. I'll work hard to provide for you and treat you with respect. That's what I can promise." She swallowed against the tightness in her throat. Now was the moment to tell him, to confess that she was not what he needed. "Mr. Kincaid, I need to be honest with you as well. I'm afraid I'm not suited to this life. I've never lived anywhere but a city. I don't know how to cook anything but the simplest meals. I can't sew beyond basic mending. I've never tended animals or worked a garden. I can read and write and do figures, but those skills won't help you much on a ranch. I'm afraid I'll fail you before I've even begun." The words tumbled out in a rush, and she felt tears prickling behind her eyes. She had been holding that confession inside since she had boarded the train in Boston, the weight of her inadequacy pressing down on her with each passing mile. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, and Deanna braced herself for anger or disappointment. Instead, when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Miss Emerson, do you know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who was brave enough to travel halfway across the country to start a new life with a stranger. I see someone who's honest enough to admit what she doesn't know instead of pretending otherwise. Those qualities count for a lot more than knowing how to pluck a chicken." He shifted the reins to one hand and turned slightly toward her. "We'll succeed together. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Two people working as a team, learning together, building something that neither one could manage alone. I don't expect you to know everything. I'll teach you what I can and you'll figure out the rest. We'll make mistakes together and fix them together. If you're willing to try, then I'm willing to be patient." Deanna felt the tears spill over then, but they were tears of relief rather than despair. "You're very kind." "I'm practical," Benjamin corrected, but his tone was warm. "A ranch is too much work for one person. I need a partner, not a servant, and certainly not someone who's already perfect. Perfect would be intimidating." The corner of his mouth quirked up. "Besides, I can't dance worth a damn and I burn biscuits more often than not, so we're starting even." A surprised laugh escaped her, and some of the tension in her shoulders eased. She looked out at the landscape rolling past, the sagebrush and sparse grass, the distant mountains. It was so different from everything she had known, but perhaps that was exactly what she needed. A chance to become someone new, someone stronger than the frightened woman who had watched her childhood home be sold to pay her father's gambling debts. "What should I call you?" she asked softly. "Benjamin, or Ben if you prefer. Most folks around here call me Ben." "Ben," she tested the name. "You may call me Deanna. Deanna." He said it carefully, as if learning the shape of it. "It's a pretty name, suits you." The wagon rolled on through the afternoon heat, and they talked in fits and starts, sharing small pieces of themselves. Deanna learned that Ben had grown up in Missouri, that his mother had died when he was 12, and his father had followed 5 years later, leaving him with enough money to start fresh somewhere new. He had chosen Nevada for the open land and the opportunity, even though he had known it would be a hard life. Ben learned that Diana's mother had passed when she was young as well, that she had kept house for her father until his death 6 months ago, and that the discovery of his debts had left her with no family and no prospects. She spoke carefully around the shame of it, but Ben seemed to understand what she was not saying. "My father drank himself to death," he said quietly. "Spent more time with a bottle than he ever did with me after my mother passed. I understand family disappointments." The sun was lowering toward the western mountains when they turned off the main road onto a narrower track that wound through the sagebrush. After another 20 minutes, A cluster of buildings appeared ahead, and Diana sat up straighter, her heart beginning to race again. The house was small but well-maintained, built of wood with a covered porch across the front. There was a barn, a chicken coop, a small corral, and a few other outbuildings she could not immediately identify. It was humble and isolated, and Diana tried to imagine herself living here, waking up each morning to this view of endless sky and distant mountains. Ben pulled the wagon up in front of the house and set the brake. "Welcome home, Diana. Home." The word felt strange and hopeful at the same time. She let him help her down, and her legs wobbled after so many hours of sitting. Ben steadied her with a hand at her elbow until she found her balance. "I'll show you inside and then bring your trunk in. I imagine you'll want to freshen up before supper." The interior of the house was dim and cool after the bright heat outside. Diana's eyes adjusted to reveal a main room with a stone fireplace, a simple sofa and 2 chairs, a table with 4 mismatched chairs, and shelves holding books and a few basic supplies. Everything was clean but Spartan, the home of a man who had been living alone and saw no need for decoration. To the right, a doorway led to the kitchen, which held a cast iron stove, a dry sink, a work table, and more shelves. To the left, 2 doors opened off the main room. Ben gestured to the first one. "This is your room. I've been sleeping in the other one. The bed's not fancy, but the mattress is decent, and I washed all the linens fresh yesterday. There's a basin and pitcher for washing, and I'll bring in water from the well." He hesitated. "I thought you might want your own space until we know each other better. There's no rush on anything. We can take our time." Diana felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly buckled her knees. She had been dreading this moment, the expectation that she would immediately become a wife in every sense to a man she had just met. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." Ben ducked his head, looking almost embarrassed. "It just seems right. Now let me get your trunk and then I'll see about supper. There's leftover stew from yesterday that I can heat up. It's nothing special, but it's filling." He brought in her trunk and set it at the foot of the narrow bed, then showed her where the outhouse was located behind the main house and hauled in a bucket of fresh water for her pitcher. Diana waited until he had left her alone before sinking down onto the bed and letting out a long, shaky breath. She was here. This was real. She was in Nevada, miles from anything she had ever known, about to start a life with a stranger who had kind eyes and rough hands, and who had promised they would succeed together. After washing her face and hands and doing her best to make herself presentable, Diana emerged from the bedroom to find Ben stirring a pot on the stove. The smell of beef and vegetables filled the small kitchen, making her stomach growl with sudden hunger. "Can I help with anything?" she asked. "Can you slice bread?" Ben gestured to a loaf on the table and a knife beside it. Diana could manage that much at least. She cut thick slices while Ben ladled stew into 2 bowls and carried them to the main room table. They sat across from each other, and Ben bowed his head briefly before picking up his spoon. Diana followed suit, offering her own silent prayer of thanks and hope. The stew was simple but good, rich with flavor and tender vegetables. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Diana found the courage to ask, "What will I need to learn first? I want to be useful." Ben considered the question while he chewed. "The chickens are probably the easiest place to start. They need feeding twice a day and fresh water, and you'll collect the eggs each morning. I'll show you in the morning. After that, maybe the garden. I've got some vegetables still producing, and they'll need watering and weeding. The cooking will come with practice. I'll work with you on that." "What about the cattle?" "That's heavier work, and most of it happens on horseback. We'll see about getting you comfortable on a horse first, and then maybe you can ride out with me sometimes." But there's no rush on that. Running a household is a full day's work on its own. He met her eyes across the table. Don't put too much pressure on yourself, Deanna. You'll learn as you go. After supper, Deanna insisted on washing the dishes despite not being entirely sure of the process without running water. Ben showed her how to heat water on the stove and pour it into a basin, and she scrubbed the bowls and spoons while he dried them and put them away. It was domestic and strange and oddly intimate, working together in the small kitchen as the last light faded from the windows. When the work was done, they sat for a little while in the main room. Ben had lit a lamp, and the warm glow pushed back the darkness. He asked her about Boston, and she asked him about the ranch, and slowly the conversation grew easier as exhaustion began to pull at Deanna's awareness. Finally, she could barely keep her eyes open, and Ben noticed. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day, but we'll take it slow." Deanna stood, smoothing her skirt. "Thank you, Ben, for everything today, for understanding." "Nothing to thank me for. We're in this together now." He smiled at her, and Deanna felt that flutter in her chest again. She retreated to her small room and changed into her nightgown, then crawled between the clean sheets. The bed was not as comfortable as the one she had grown up with, but it was infinitely better than what she had been sleeping on during her journey. The house creaked and settled around her, unfamiliar sounds in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Deanna closed her eyes and thought about the day, about the man in the other room who had promised they would succeed together. She had been so afraid, and she was still afraid, but beneath the fear was a tiny seed of hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found something good in this harsh desert landscape. The next morning, Diana woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the sound of movement in the main room. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses and braided her hair, then emerged to find Ben already up and moving about. "Morning," he greeted her. "There's coffee on the stove and some bread and butter for breakfast. After we eat, I'll show you the chickens." The coffee was strong and bitter, nothing like the tea Deanna was used to, but she drank it and felt the warmth spread through her. The bread was slightly stale but edible with butter, and she made a mental note to ask Ben about baking. After breakfast, he led her out to the chicken coop, a sturdy structure surrounded by wire fencing. A dozen hens scratched and pecked at the ground inside, and a rooster watched them with a suspicious eye from his perch. "They're pretty simple creatures," Ben explained. "Morning and evening, you scatter feed for them like this." He demonstrated, tossing handfuls of grain from a bucket. The chickens rushed toward the food with enthusiastic clucking. "Make sure their water trough is full and clean, then check the nesting boxes for eggs." He opened the coop door and gestured for Deanna to follow. She stepped carefully inside, wary of the birds, but they mostly ignored her in favor of the grain. Ben showed her the nesting boxes built along one wall, several of them containing smooth brown eggs. "Just reach in gentle and take them. The hens might complain, but they won't hurt you." Diana reached into the nearest box, half expecting the hen sitting there to attack her hand, but the bird merely shifted and made a low, grumbling sound. Deanna's fingers closed around the warm egg, and she lifted it out carefully, feeling absurdly proud of herself for such a simple task. "That's it," Ben encouraged. "See, you're a natural." They collected a dozen eggs between them and carried them back to the house in a basket. Ben showed her how to store them in the cool root cellar, and then they moved on to the garden, a patch of ground behind the house where tomatoes, squash, beans, and herbs grew in neat rows. "It's past the peak of the season, but we'll keep getting produce for another few weeks if we take care of it," Ben explained. He showed her how to check the plants for ripe vegetables, how to pull weeds without disturbing the roots, and how to water from the well without drowning the plants. Deanna worked alongside him in the morning sun, getting dirt under her fingernails and feeling sweat trickle down her back. It was hard work, different from anything she had ever done, but there was something satisfying about it too. She could see the results of her effort immediately. The weeds gone and the plants standing straighter with their drink of water. By midday, they were both hot and tired. Ben declared it time for a break and made sandwiches with leftover beef and bread. They ate on the porch, where a slight breeze offered some relief from the heat. "You did good this morning," Ben said. "Really good. I know it's all new, but you're catching on quick." Deanna felt a flush of pleasure at the praise. "It helps that you're a patient teacher." "I remember what it was like when I first came out here," Ben said, gazing out at his land. "Everything felt impossible. I didn't know cattle from coyotes, and I made every mistake you can imagine. Nearly lost half my first herd to bad water because I didn't know better. But I learned, and now this place feels like mine. You'll get there too." That afternoon, Ben needed to ride out to check on the cattle in the far pasture, and Deanna used the time to explore the house more thoroughly. She found Ben's bedroom, as Spartan as the rest of the house, with just a bed, a trunk, and a small table. She felt like an intruder looking in, so she moved on quickly. The kitchen became her focus. She examined the stove, trying to understand how to regulate its temperature. She looked through the supplies on the shelves, taking inventory of what was available. There was flour and cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, and a few spices. Not much to work with compared to what she had been used to, but she supposed that was part of the challenge. Deanna found a cookbook tucked on a shelf, its pages worn and stained. She carried it to the table and began reading through recipes, trying to find something she thought she could manage for supper. Biscuits seemed simple enough, and there was a recipe for fried chicken that did not look too complicated. When Ben returned in the late afternoon, dusty and tired, he found Deanna in the kitchen with flour on her hands and a determined expression on her face. She had managed to pluck and clean one of the chickens after watching it for 20 minutes and working up the courage, and now she was attempting to cut it into pieces. "You killed one of my chickens?" Ben asked, but there was amusement in his voice rather than anger. "You said there were a dozen. I thought one could be spared for supper. Was I wrong?" Deanna looked up anxiously. "No, you're right. I'm just surprised. That's not easy work for someone who's never done it." "It was horrible," Deanna admitted, "but I wanted to try. I'm making fried chicken and biscuits, or at least attempting to." "Want some help?" "Yes, please." They worked together, Ben guiding her through the process of flouring and frying the chicken pieces while she mixed the biscuit dough. Her first attempt at biscuits was too dense, so she made another batch with Ben's advice about not overworking the dough. The second batch came out better, though not perfect. The chicken was greasy and some pieces were more done than others, but when they sat down to eat, Deanna felt proud of what they had accomplished together. Ben ate with genuine appetite and complimented the meal, and Deanna thought that maybe this was what partnership was supposed to feel like. Two people working together toward a common goal. The days began to develop a rhythm. Deanna woke early and started the fire in the stove, then collected eggs from the chickens while Ben tended to the horses and milked the cow. They made breakfast together, usually something simple like eggs and bread or oatmeal porridge. Then the day's work began in earnest. Ben taught her to bake bread, and after several failures, she produced a loaf that was actually edible all the way through. He showed her how to churn butter from the cow's cream, a task that left her arms aching but yielded a product far better than anything she had ever bought in a store. She learned to recognize the signs of a hen about to go broody, to tell when the vegetables needed water just by looking at them. to read the sky for approaching weather. In turn, Diana organized the house, bringing a sense of order to Ben's bachelor chaos. She mended his worn shirts and socks, discovering that she was better at sewing than she had thought when the need was real. She began keeping track of supplies and making lists of what they would need from town. She read to him in the evenings from the books on his shelves, discovering that he loved adventure stories, but had never had anyone to share them with. 3 weeks after her arrival, Ben asked if she wanted to learn to ride. Diana was terrified of the horses, who seemed enormous and unpredictable, but she agreed because she could see how much easier it would make things if she could ride out with Ben sometimes, instead of staying behind at the house. He started her on a gentle mare named Daisy, who was used to beginners. The first few rides were just around the corral, Diana clinging to the saddle horn while Ben led Daisy in slow circles. Gradually, she relaxed enough to feel the rhythm of the horse's movement. And then one afternoon, Ben turned her loose in the corral, and she rode on her own for the first time, circling the enclosure with a grin of triumph on her face. "You're a natural," Ben called out, and Diana laughed with pure joy. They began riding out together in the mornings, just short trips at first to check the cattle in the nearer pastures. Diana learned to spot the signs of a sick animal, to estimate the weight of a steer by eye, to understand the patterns of the herd's movement. The work was hard and sometimes monotonous, but there was beauty in it too, in the vast open spaces and the clean air and the satisfaction of seeing healthy animals under their care. As October arrived and the heat began to ease, Diana realized that she had not thought about Boston in days. The life she had left behind felt increasingly distant, like something that had happened to someone else. Here, she was needed. Here, she was learning and growing and becoming someone stronger than she had ever imagined she could be. Her relationship with Ben was growing too, in small but meaningful ways. He had stopped calling her Miss Emerson within the first week, and now they were simply Diana and Ben, partners in the work of the ranch. They had fallen into comfortable routines, anticipating each other's needs, working in tandem without needing to speak. But there was more than just comfortable partnership. Diana found herself noticing things about Ben that had nothing to do with his skills as a rancher. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the deep timbre of his laugh, the gentleness of his hands despite their calluses. The way he always made sure she had the better portion at meals. The way he worried about her when she seemed tired. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention. She thought about the fact that they were married but living like friendly roommates, and she wondered if Ben was waiting for some sign from her that she was ready for more. The truth was, she was not sure what she wanted. She had come to respect and admire Ben deeply, and she thought she might be falling in love with him. But the idea of crossing that threshold from partnership to true intimacy still frightened her. One evening in mid-October, they were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. It had become their routine, this quiet time at the end of the day when they could rest and talk about nothing in particular. "Diana," Ben said suddenly, his voice more serious than usual, "I want to tell you something." She turned to look at him, her heart beginning to beat faster. "What is it?" "I know we got married under unusual circumstances. A business arrangement, really. I needed a wife and you needed a home. But these past weeks, getting to know you, working alongside you, I want you to know that I'm grateful you came here. You've made this place feel like a real home instead of just a house I sleep in." Diana felt warmth spreading through her chest. "I'm grateful too. You've been so patient with me, so kind. I was so afraid I would disappoint you, but you've made me feel capable of things I never thought possible." Ben shifted in his chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I want to be honest with you about something else. I'm falling in love with you, Deanna. Maybe I shouldn't say it so plain, but I'm not a man for dancing around things. I think about you all the time. I look forward to every moment we spend together. When I ride out to check the herd, I'm always eager to get back because you're here waiting. And I want you to know that I'll wait as long as you need me to wait. There's no pressure, but I wanted you to know how I feel." Diana's breath caught in her throat. She had hoped, but she had not been sure, and now here it was laid bare between them. "Ben, I think I'm falling in love with you too. I didn't expect it. I thought this would be a practical arrangement and nothing more, but you've shown me what it means to have a true partner. Someone who believes in me and helps me believe in myself. I've never felt this way about anyone before." Ben reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and took her hand in his. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, and Diana felt the simple touch send shivers up her arm. "Can I court you proper? I know we're already married, but I'd like to do things right. Take you to town dances, buy you little presents, spend time getting to know each other beyond just the work of the ranch." "I'd like that very much," Deanna said softly. Ben raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her fingers, and Deanna thought her heart might burst from the sweetness of it. The next Saturday, Ben drove them into Lovelock for supplies, but he had another purpose too. He took Deanna to the general store and told her to pick out fabric for a new dress, something nice that she could wear to social occasions. Deanna protested that it was an unnecessary expense, but Ben insisted. "A man should buy nice things for the woman he's courting," he said with a smile that made her cheeks flush. She chose a deep green calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and Ben purchased enough for a dress and a bit extra. The store owner, a friendly woman named Mrs. Henley, offered to help Deanna with the sewing if she needed guidance, and Deanna accepted gratefully. After the general store, Ben took her to the small restaurant at the hotel and bought her lunch, a luxury Deanna had not experienced in months. They sat at a table by the window and ate roast beef with potatoes and carrots, and Ben told her stories about the early days of his ranch that made her laugh until tears streamed down her face. Other people came up to their table to greet Ben and be introduced to his new wife. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, and Deanna began to feel like she was becoming part of a community instead of just an isolated ranch wife. On the drive home, Diana leaned against Ben's shoulder, feeling happy and content in a way she had not felt in years. Ben slipped his arm around her waist, and she let herself relax into his warmth. "Thank you for today," she said. "It was wonderful. First of many," Ben promised. "There's a dance coming up next month for the harvest celebration. I'd like to take you if you want to go." "Even though you can't dance worth a damn," Deanna teased, echoing his words from her first day. Ben laughed. "I'll step on your toes, but I'll hold you close while I do it. Then I absolutely want to go." The weeks leading up to the dance were busy ones. The last of the garden needed to be harvested and preserved for winter. Deanna learned to can vegetables under Mrs. Henley's guidance, spending several afternoons in town working with the other ranch wives. It gave her a chance to make friends, something she had desperately needed. She also worked on her new dress with Mrs. Henley's help, learning to use the treadle sewing machine at the general store. The green calico came together into a dress with a fitted bodice and a full skirt that made Diana feel pretty for the first time in a long time. At the ranch, things continued to deepen between her and Ben. He began finding excuses to touch her, a hand at the small of her back as they walked to the barn, his fingers brushing hers when they worked side by side in the kitchen. a kiss pressed to her forehead before they parted for bed each night. Diana found herself wishing he would kiss her properly, but she was too shy to ask. Instead, she tried to show him through her own gestures that she welcomed his affection. She would rest her hand on his arm when they talked, sit close enough that their shoulders touched when they read together in the evenings, hold his gaze a moment longer than necessary when he said something that touched her heart. The night before the dance, Diana could barely sleep for excitement. She woke early and found Ben already up, pacing in the main room with a nervous energy she had never seen in him before. "What's wrong?" she asked, alarmed. "Nothing's wrong. I just have something I want to give you before we go to the dance, and I'm nervous about it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. "It's not much, but I saw it in the general store and thought of you." Diana unwrapped the cloth to find a delicate silver locket on a chain. She gasped, her fingers trembling as she lifted it to the light. "Ben, it's beautiful." "Open it," he urged. Inside the locket were two small spaces for photographs. One was empty, but the other held a tiny slip of paper with careful writing on it. "Together." "I thought maybe we could get a photograph taken of us sometime, and you could put it in the other side," Ben explained, his ears reddening with embarrassment. "So you'd always have a reminder that we're in this together." Diana threw her arms around his neck, the locket still clutched in one hand. "I love it, I love you." The words spilled out before she could think about them, but she did not want to take them back. They were true as anything she had ever said. Ben's arms came around her waist, holding her close. "I love you too, Diana, so damn much." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, and she saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. This time, when he bent his head toward hers, she rose up on her toes to meet him halfway, and their lips came together in a kiss that started gentle and quickly deepened into something more. Diana had been kissed before, chased pecks from would-be suitors in Boston, but nothing had prepared her for this. Ben kissed her like she was precious, like she was everything he had been waiting for, and Diana kissed him back with all the love and trust and desire that had been building in her for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ben rested his forehead against hers. "I want to be your husband in every way, Diana, but only when you're ready. Only when you want it too." "I want it," Diana whispered. "I want you. I'm ready." Ben kissed her again, and then he was lifting her into his arms and carrying her toward his bedroom. Diana clung to him, her heart racing with anticipation and nervousness and love so strong it made her dizzy. He set her down gently beside the bed and cupped her face in his hands. "Are you sure? We can wait. There's no rush." "I'm sure," Diana said, and she was. This was right. He was right. They were meant to be together, and she wanted to share everything with him. No more holding back. No more fear. What followed was tender and sweet, Ben treating her like she was made of spun glass, his hands gentle despite their roughness, his voice soft with murmured endearments and reassurances. Diana gave herself to him completely, and in return he gave her pleasure she had not known existed, and a sense of belonging that went deeper than any physical joining. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Diana's head on Ben's chest while he stroked her hair. The morning sun slanted through the window, and somewhere outside the chickens were complaining about their delayed breakfast, but neither of them moved. "We're going to miss the dance if we stay here much longer," Diana murmured, though she made no effort to get up. "Don't care," Ben said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I've got everything I want right here." But eventually they did rise and tend to the necessary work of the day, moving around each other with new awareness, stealing kisses in the barn and the kitchen and anywhere else they could. Diana felt transformed, as if she had been living in black and white and someone had suddenly shown her color. That evening, they dressed for the dance. Deanna put on her green dress and the locket Ben had given her, and Ben wore his best shirt and trousers with his hair slicked back. They looked at each other and grinned like fools, both of them knowing they were the luckiest people alive. The dance was held in the town meeting hall, which had been decorated with fall leaves and lanterns. A small band of local musicians played fiddle and guitar, and the room was packed with ranchers and their families, shopkeepers, cowboys, and everyone else from the area who wanted a night of celebration. Ben led Deanna onto the floor for the first dance, and true to his word, he stepped on her toes twice and apologized profusely both times. But he held her close and looked at her like she hung the moon, and Deanna did not care one bit about her toes. Between dances, they were pulled into conversations with various people. Deanna met more of the neighboring ranchers and their wives, and she felt welcomed into their community. Several people commented on how happy Ben looked, and he would just smile and pull Deanna a little closer to his side. Mrs. Henley found Deanna during a break in the music and pulled her aside with a knowing look. "That man is head over heels for you, dear. I've known Ben Kincaid for 6 years, and I've never seen him smile so much. You're good for him." "He's good for me too," Deanna said, watching Ben across the room where he was talking cattle prices with another rancher. As if he felt her gaze, he looked up and winked at her, and Deanna felt her heart skip. The evening flew by in a whirl of music and laughter and dancing. When it finally came time to leave, Diana's feet hurt and her face ached from smiling, but she could not remember ever being happier. On the drive home, she dozed against Ben's shoulder while he hummed one of the tunes from the dance. When they arrived at the ranch, he carried her inside despite her protests that she could walk, and he did not put her down until they reached the bedroom they would now share. The next months passed in a blur of work and love and deepening connection. Winter came to the high desert, bringing cold nights and occasional snow. Deanna learned to manage the household through the changing seasons, preserving food, rationing supplies, keeping the house warm with carefully managed fires. Ben taught her to shoot, both rifle and pistol, so that she could defend herself and the livestock if needed while he was out on the range. Deanna turned out to have a good eye and steady hands, and she felt safer knowing she had the skill if she ever needed it. They worked together through the challenges of winter ranching, breaking ice on the water troughs each morning, supplementing the cattle's feed when snow covered the grazing land, dealing with a difficult birth when one of the cows calved early. Through it all, they supported each other, celebrating successes and weathering difficulties as the team Ben had promised they would become. In December, they traveled to Lovelock to have their photograph taken, a special trip that felt like a celebration of everything they had built together. The photographer positioned them carefully, Ben standing behind Deanna with his hand on her shoulder, both of them wearing their best clothes and trying not to blink during the long exposure. When the photograph was ready a week later, they both studied it carefully. Deanna thought they looked like a real couple, not like two strangers who had been brought together by necessity. Ben had the photograph made small enough to fit in Deanna's locket, and she wore it every day, the weight of it against her heart, a constant reminder of their promise to succeed together. Christmas was a quiet affair, just the two of them exchanging simple gifts by the fire. Ben gave Deanna a pair of fine leather gloves for riding, and she gave him a new shirt she had sewn herself with careful stitches. They roasted a chicken and made biscuits and gravy, and Deanna thought it was the best Christmas she had ever had because it was the first one where she felt truly loved. As 1883 began, Deanna realized that she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She waited another few weeks to be sure, afraid to hope, before she finally told Ben one evening as they sat together after supper. "I think I'm expecting a baby," she said quietly, watching his face for his reaction. Ben's eyes went wide, and then a huge grin split his face. He let out a whoop of joy that startled her before pulling her into his arms and spinning her around. "A baby, we're going to have a baby. You're happy?" Deanna asked, laughing and dizzy from the spinning. "Happy, Deanna, I'm over the moon. This is the best news you could have given me." He set her down carefully as if she had suddenly become fragile. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more? I'm fine," Deanna assured him, touched by his concern. "Mrs. Henley told me that pregnant women don't need to be treated like invalids. I can keep working as long as I feel up to it." But Ben insisted on taking over some of the heavier chores, and he fussed over her in ways that were both sweet and occasionally exasperating. Deanna bore it with good humor because she could see how much joy the coming baby brought him. As winter gave way to spring, Deanna's belly began to swell with their child. The other ranch wives rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and assurances that childbirth was not as terrifying as it seemed. Mrs. Henley appointed herself Diana's unofficial midwife and made regular trips out to the ranch to check on her. Ben was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about Deanna doing too much or getting overtired. She had to firmly remind him several times that she was perfectly capable of collecting eggs and working in the garden, even if her balance was not what it used to be with her changing center of gravity. The baby came in late September, almost exactly a year after Diana had arrived in Lovelock. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Diana was certain she could not endure another minute. But Mrs. Henley was there coaching her through it, and Ben held her hand and whispered encouragement. And finally, their son came into the world with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at the entire process. "It's a boy," Mrs. Henley announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Diana's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Diana looked down at her son in wonder, barely able to process that this tiny person had come from her body. He had a shock of dark hair and his father's nose, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they were unfocused but beautiful. Ben was crying openly, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and child. "He's perfect. You're perfect. I love you so much, Deanna." They named him Daniel Benjamin Kincaid, and he became the center of their world. The first weeks were exhausting, Diana recovering from the birth while learning to care for an infant who seemed to need constant attention. But Ben was there every step of the way, changing nappies and walking the floor with Daniel when he was fussy, giving Diana time to rest and recover. As Diana's strength returned, they settled into new routines that accommodated their growing family. Daniel proved to be a relatively easy baby once they figured out his patterns, and Diana found that she loved motherhood in ways she had not anticipated. Watching Ben with their son, seeing the tenderness and wonder on his face when he held Daniel, made her fall in love with her husband all over again. The ranch prospered through the next few years. Ben expanded the herd gradually, and with Diana's help managing the household side of things, they were able to save money and make improvements. They built a larger barn, added on to the house to create more space, and hired a young cowboy named Jack to help with the heavier ranch work during busy seasons. Daniel grew from infant to toddler, a sturdy boy with his father's build and his mother's quick mind. He loved the animals and would toddle after Ben whenever he could, demanding to help with the ranch work. Ben was endlessly patient with him, teaching him about the horses and cattle, letting him scatter chicken feed, holding him up to see inside birds' nests. When Daniel was 2, Deanna discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and Ben was only slightly less overprotective the second time around. Their daughter arrived in the summer of 1885, a tiny thing with a cap of blonde hair and her mother's green eyes. They named her Rose, and she was a different child entirely from her brother. Where Daniel had been placid and easy, Rose was demanding and particular, wanting things just so and howling with indignation when the world did not meet her expectations. But she was also affectionate and funny, and both Ben and Diana adored her completely. With two small children, life on the ranch became a constant juggling act of work and childcare. Diana learned to work with Rose tied to her back in a sling while Daniel played nearby, and Ben included both children in his daily routines as much as possible. It was exhausting and chaotic and wonderful. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Daniel started learning his letters from Diana, who taught him in the kitchen while she worked. Rose took her first steps chasing after the chickens, and Diana had to rescue her from their indignant pecking more than once. The ranch continued to grow, Ben's careful management and Diana's financial record allowing them to slowly build prosperity. They faced challenges too. A hard winter in 1887 killed several head of cattle and nearly broke them financially, but they worked together to recover. A summer drought in 1889 forced them to drive the herd to new grazing land, an exhausting week-long effort that required hiring additional help. Through it all, they supported each other, just as Ben had promised that first day when Diana had confessed her fears of failure. By 1890, Daniel was 7 and Rose was 5, and the ranch was one of the most successful operations in the area. Ben and Diana had built something real and lasting through their partnership, not just a successful business but a true home filled with love and laughter. One evening in late summer, after the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Ben and Diana sat on the porch watching the sunset just as they had done so many times before. Diana leaned against her husband's shoulder, his arm around her waist, and thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You remember what I said that first day?" Diana asked. "That I was afraid I'd fail you," Ben chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I remember. And I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I'd ever met for being honest about your fears instead of trying to hide them." "I was so terrified," Diana admitted, "of everything. The ranch, the desert, you, the future. I was certain I was going to disappoint you." "You could never disappoint me." Ben pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You've exceeded every hope I had when I sent those letters to Boston. You've made my life richer than I ever dreamed possible." Diana tilted her face up to look at him. "We succeeded together, didn't we?" "Just like you promised." "We succeeded together," Ben agreed, "and we're going to keep succeeding together for the rest of our lives." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Diana thought about how far she had come from that frightened woman stepping off the stagecoach 8 years ago. She had found strength she did not know she possessed, skills she had never imagined learning, and love beyond her wildest dreams. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly, and closer by, the chickens settled in for the night with contented clucking. The house behind them held their sleeping children and all the evidence of the life they had built together. Diana closed her eyes and breathed in the desert air, scented with sage and dust and the promise of rain. This harsh, unforgiving land had become home. The stranger she had married had become her partner, her love, her everything. And the woman who had been so afraid of failing had discovered that success was not about being perfect, but about showing up every day and trying, about building something worth keeping through patience and effort and love. "What are you thinking about?" Ben asked softly. Deanna opened her eyes and smiled. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am. How grateful I am that you sent those letters, that I had the courage to come here, that you gave me a chance when I was so certain I would let you down." "I'm the lucky one," Ben countered. "The day you stepped off that stagecoach was the best day of my life, even though I didn't know it yet. You've given me everything I could ever want. A true partner, a family, a home that's more than just walls and a roof. I love you more now than I did yesterday, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today. That's how it's always been with us." Diana felt tears prickling at her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, more than words can say." They sat together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, content in the comfortable silence that only comes from years of deep companionship. Inside the house, one of the children stirred and called out, and Deanna started to rise, but Ben held her in place. "I'll go," he said, kissing her forehead. "You stay here and enjoy the evening." Deanna watched him disappear into the house, heard his gentle voice soothing whichever child had woken, and felt her heart swell with love. This life they had built was not always easy, but it was good. It was real. It was theirs. The years that followed brought more changes, as years always do. Daniel grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did, and showed every sign of wanting to take it over one day. Rose remained spirited and strong-willed, but she developed a talent for gentling horses that amazed both her parents. In 1892, Diana gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Samuel. He was an easy, cheerful baby who smiled more than he cried, and who seemed content to watch the world go by from his place in Diana's arms or on Ben's hip. The ranch continued to prosper, and Ben and Diana became pillars of the Lovelock community. They helped their neighbors during hard times, contributed to the building of a school in town, and hosted gatherings for the other ranching families. Deanna became known for her practical wisdom and her willingness to help anyone in need, while Ben's reputation for honesty and fair dealing made him a respected voice in local matters. As the children grew older, the house filled with noise and activity. Daniel helped his father with the cattle and horses, learning the business from the ground up. Rose developed a passion for reading and would spend hours with her nose in a book when she was not working with the animals. Samuel was the social one, making friends with every child in the county and organizing elaborate games that usually ended with someone muddy or scraped up. Deanna taught all three children their letters and numbers, determined that they would have good educations even living out on an isolated ranch. Ben taught them about the land, about weather and water, and how to read the signs that nature provided. Together, they raised their children to be strong, capable, and kind. In 1898, when Deanna was 35 and Ben was 38, they celebrated their 16th anniversary. The years had left their marks on both of them. Deanna's dark hair showed strands of silver at the temples, and Ben's face was deeply lined from years in the sun. But they were both healthy and strong, and the love between them had only deepened with time. Their anniversary fell on a Saturday, and the children conspired with Mrs. Henley to plan a surprise celebration. When Ben and Diana returned from a trip to check the fences in the far pasture, they found their house transformed with decorations and filled with neighbors who had come to celebrate with them. There was music and dancing and more food than Deanna had seen in one place in years. The children performed a skit they had written about their parents' courtship, getting all the details slightly wrong in ways that had everyone laughing. Mrs. Henley gave a speech about how she had known from the start that Ben and Deanna were meant to be together, which was not strictly true but was delivered with such conviction that no one questioned it. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left and the children were asleep, Ben led Deanna outside to their favorite spot on the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, as they always were in the clear desert air. 16 years, Ben mused, pulling Deanna close against his side. It's hard to believe it's been that long. It feels like yesterday that I was waiting at the depot, scared to death that you'd take one look at me and get right back on that stagecoach. I was the scared one, Deanna reminded him. I was certain I was going to fail you within a week. Instead, you succeeded beyond anything I could have imagined. Ben turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Deanna, you've made every one of these 16 years better than the last. You've given me children I'm proud of, a home I love coming back to, and a partnership that makes me stronger than I could ever be alone. I don't have fancy words, but I need you to know that loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life. Deanna stood on her toes to kiss him, pouring 16 years of love and gratitude and joy into the gesture. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. You told me we'd succeed together, she whispered. And you were right. About everything. They stood together under the stars, wrapped in each other's arms, and Deanna thought about the terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach so long ago. That woman had been afraid of failing, afraid of disappointment, afraid of a future she could not control. But with Ben's patient support and unwavering belief in her, she had become someone different, someone strong and capable and confident. She had learned that success was not about being perfect, but about showing up every day and doing the work, about being willing to fail and try again, about building something lasting with patience and love. And most importantly, she had learned that the greatest success of all was finding someone to share the journey with, someone who believed in you even when you did not believe in yourself, someone who promised you would succeed together, and then spent every day making that promise come true. The ranch continued to thrive as the new century approached. Daniel, now a young man of 17, took on more and more responsibility for the daily operations, showing the same careful management skills his father had demonstrated. Rose, at 15, had developed such a reputation for working with difficult horses that neighboring ranchers would bring their problem animals to her. Samuel, at 8, was still the wild one, but his infectious enthusiasm and genuine kindness endeared him to everyone he met. In 1899, Deanna realized she was expecting again at the age of 36. The pregnancy was harder than the previous ones had been, her body not quite as resilient as it had been when she was younger. Ben worried constantly, and the older children stepped up to take on more of the household chores so Deanna could rest. Their fourth child, a daughter they named Clara, arrived in early 1900, just as the new century was dawning. She was small and delicate, and Deanna's recovery took longer than it had with the other births. But with her family's help, she regained her strength, and Clara proved to be a healthy, happy baby despite her small size. Ben was besotted with his youngest daughter, carrying her around the ranch and showing her everything with the same wonder he had shown the older children. Deanna would watch them together and feel her heart swell with love for this man who had promised her they would succeed together, and had spent every day of the past 18 years making good on that promise. The years moved forward with their steady rhythm of seasons and work and family milestones. Daniel fell in love with a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property and married her in 1902, bringing his bride to live on the ranch and help with the growing operation. Rose shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to attend veterinary college back east. And though Ben and Deanna worried about letting her go so far away, they supported her dream. Samuel grew into a charming young man who seemed equally at home working cattle or entertaining guests at one of the social events Deanna loved to host. And Clara, the baby of the family, proved to have inherited her mother's quick mind and love of learning. In 1905, 23 years after Deanna had first arrived in Lovelock, Daniel and his wife presented Ben and Deanna with their first grandchild, a sturdy boy they named Benjamin after his grandfather. The sight of Ben holding his namesake with tears streaming down his weathered face was one Deanna knew she would remember for the rest of her life. The ranch had grown substantially over the years. What had started as a modest operation of 500 acres, and a small herd had expanded to over 1,500 acres with several hundred head of quality cattle. The house had been enlarged multiple times to accommodate the growing family, and additional outbuildings dotted the property. But despite the growth and prosperity, the heart of it all remained the partnership between Ben and Deanna. They still worked side by side, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset, still found moments to steal kisses in the barn or hold hands under the table at meals. Their love had evolved over the years, from the tentative beginnings of two strangers trying to build something together to a deep, abiding connection that was the foundation of everything they had created. They knew each other's thoughts often before words were spoken, could anticipate each other's needs, and found joy in the simplest moments together. In 1907, Rose returned from the East with her veterinary degree, one of the first women in the country to achieve such a qualification. She was 22 years old and full of ideas for improving animal care in the region. Ben and Deanna helped her set up a practice in Lovelock, and she quickly became known as the best animal doctor for 100 miles in any direction. Samuel, at 15, had started courting a girl from town, much to the amusement of his older siblings who teased him mercilessly. And Clara, now 7, had declared that she wanted to be a teacher when she grew up and spent hours conducting lessons for her dolls and any younger children she could convince to sit still. On a warm evening in September of 1907, 25 years to the day after Deanna had first arrived in Nevada, Ben and Deanna stood together in the same spot where he had first told her they would succeed together. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and peaceful. The house behind them rang with the voices of their children and grandchildren, 3 generations now calling this place home. 25 years, Deanna said softly, leaning into Ben's embrace. A quarter of a century. Best 25 years of my life, Ben replied, his voice rough with emotion. Every single day with you has been a gift. Deanna turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his weathered face. They were both older now, their hair more gray than not, their bodies bearing the marks of years of hard work. But when she looked at Ben, Deanna still saw the young man who had promised her they would succeed together, who had believed in her when she had not believed in herself. I was so afraid when I came here, Deanna said. Afraid I would fail you, fail myself, fail at everything. I couldn't imagine how we would make this work. But we did make it work, Ben said, covering her hand with his. We succeeded together, just like I promised. We built a ranch, raised a family, created a legacy that will outlive us both. And we did it by being partners in everything, by supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating the good times together. I love you, Deanna said simply. More than I did yesterday, and not as much as I will tomorrow. That's how it's always been with us. Ben smiled at hearing his own words from years ago echoed back to him. He leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of 25 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. From inside the house, they could hear Daniel's son calling for his grandparents to come see something. Rose's laughter rang out, followed by Samuel's teasing voice. Clara was probably organizing some elaborate game, as she loved to do. "We should go in," Deanna said reluctantly, not really wanting to move from this perfect moment. "In a minute," Ben said, holding her a little closer. "Let me just hold my wife for one more minute and think about how lucky I am." They stood together as the sun set over their ranch, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Diana thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had come to Nevada as a mail-order bride, terrified and uncertain, convinced she would fail at everything this new life required of her. But Ben had seen something in her that she had not seen in herself. He had offered her not just a home but a partnership, not just marriage but true companionship. He had been patient when she was learning, encouraging when she was discouraged, loving when she most needed to feel loved. And together, they had built something extraordinary. Not just a successful ranch or a loving family, but a life that was rich with meaning and purpose and joy. They had faced challenges and overcome them, weathered storms and emerged stronger, grown from strangers into partners, into lovers, into two halves of one whole. Deanna had been afraid she would fail, but Ben had promised they would succeed together. And he had been right. About everything. They had succeeded in ways neither of them could have imagined on that first day when she had stepped off the stagecoach into the harsh Nevada sun. The children's voices grew more insistent, calling them back to the house, back to the family, back to the life they had built together. Ben took Deanna's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 25 years of practice, and together they walked toward the house. As they reached the door, Ben paused and looked back at the land stretching out around them, golden in the fading light. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Diana followed his gaze, taking in the ranch, the mountains in the distance, the vast sky overhead. Then she looked at her husband, the man who had believed in her from the very beginning, and smiled. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Not a single one. This life, this place, you, our family, everything we've built together, it's more than I ever dreamed possible. You promised we'd succeed together, and we have. Beyond my wildest hopes." Ben squeezed her hand and led her inside, where their family waited. The house was warm and filled with laughter and love, the culmination of 25 years of hard work and partnership, and unwavering commitment to each other. As Deanna settled into her favorite chair with little Benjamin on her lap and watched her family gathered around, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. She had been so afraid of failing, but instead she had found success in its truest form, not measured in acres or cattle or money, but in love and family, and the deep satisfaction of knowing she had built something lasting with the man she loved. The evening passed in warmth and joy, and when it finally came time for everyone to head to their own beds, Ben and Deanna found themselves alone once more. They prepared for sleep with the comfortable routine of decades of marriage, and when they finally lay down together, Diana curled into Ben's side as naturally as breathing. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Ben asked, his arm tightening around her. "For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For promising we'd succeed together and then making sure we did. For 25 years of love and partnership. For everything." Ben pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher who didn't know the first thing about courting a lady properly. Thank you for coming all the way to Nevada and building this life with me. Thank you for being exactly what I needed, even when you thought you were failing." They lay in comfortable silence for a few moments on the edge of sleep when Deanna spoke again. Ben. Yes, love. We really did succeed together, didn't we? We really did, Ben confirmed. And we're going to keep succeeding together for as long as we both shall live. That's my promise to you, the same one I made 25 years ago. We're partners in everything, Deanna, now and always. Deanna smiled in the darkness, her hand finding Ben's and holding tight. They had succeeded together, and they would continue to succeed together, facing whatever the future brought with the same partnership and love that had carried them through the past quarter century. As sleep finally claimed them both, Deanna's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude. She had been a mail-order bride who feared she would fail, but she had found a cowboy who promised they would succeed together. And in the end, that promise had changed everything.